the toolbox arrived before she did. Oswald Fenn heard the thud of it on his front step before he heard the knock, a heavy, deliberate sound, like someone setting down a thing they had carried too long. He opened the door to find an orc woman standing in the October rain, her hands at her sides, her face steady in the way of someone who had practiced what she was going to say and was now simply waiting for the chance to say it. She was tall, broad across the shoulders. Her braids were dark and pinned back with an iron clasp, and she wore a traveler's coat that had seen more roads than seasons. The toolbox at her feet was old, iron latches, the wood worn smooth at the handles. She did not apologize for the rain or the hour. "My name is Sarah Dunveld," she said. "My father was Arvald Dunveld. I think he knew your father." Oswald stood in the doorway, a wood chisel still in his hand, and the name moved through him like a cold draft through a room he thought he had sealed. Arvald Dunveld. He had heard that name exactly once. He had been 12 years old, and his father, Rennick Fenn, frontier road builder, a man who was made of equal parts stubbornness and sawdust, had said it at the supper table on the night he came home from the Eastern Road. Said it quietly, the way men name things they do not quite have the words for. Then never said it again. Oswald stepped back from the door. "Come in," he said. She lifted the toolbox herself, though he moved to help her. It landed on his workbench with a weight that rattled the hanging chisels, and Sarah Dunveld looked around his shop, the shavings on the floor, the half-finished chair in the corner, the smell of linseed and cedar, and something in her face settled, just slightly. "He was a woodwright," she said. "Your father." "The Eastern Road." "He was," Oswald said. He put the kettle on without asking. 40 years ago, give or take. He came back when I was 12. He never talked much about it." "My father did," Sarah said. She set both hands flat on the top of the toolbox. "He talked about it until the day he died. He talked about a human man named Rennick Fenn who was the only person on the entire Eastern Road crew who treated him like a partner instead of a hired pair of hands." Her voice did not waver. "He wanted to write to your father. He kept the name. He kept it for 30 years. Oswald set 2 cups on the table and did not speak. "He died in the spring," she said. "He left me this." Her hands moved to the iron latches. "And a letter. He asked me to bring them here." She opened the toolbox. Inside, the tools themselves, worn to a brightness that only came from decades of use. A set of hand planes, a marking gauge, a pair of spokeshaves with handles worn down to the perfect shape of a man's grip. The smell of old oil and cedar rose up from the box like a season. Oswald had been a woodcarver for 45 years, and he knew good tools the way a farmer knows good ground. He looked at them and was quiet for a moment. Then Sarah reached beneath the top tray and drew out an envelope. The paper was cream-colored and old, soft at the corners. It was sealed, and across the front, in careful block letters, were 3 words. "For Rennick's son." Oswald did not take it right away. He looked at it for a long moment, the rain still pattering on the workshop roof, the kettle beginning to hiss. "He knew your father was gone," he said. "He heard," Sarah said. "4 years ago. He kept the letter anyway. He said someone ought to know what happened on that road." She held it out. "He said someone ought to be told." Oswald took the letter. He opened it slowly, at the table, with his tea going cold beside him, and he read. It took him a long time. The Eastern Road, the letter said, was the hardest build of the frontier expansion, a cliff-cut path through the Ashfin ridgeline in the worst winter in 30 years. The crew was a rough collection of men hired at the bottom rate, and by the 3rd month of cuts and cold they were half-starved and fraying. Rennick Fenn, the letter said, was the only man on the crew who came to work every morning without fury in him. Who shared his bread without keeping count. Who treated the orc woodwright hired to fell the great grey pines as though the work they did together was simply work, and the men who did it simply a men. On the 47th day of the 3rd winter month, the forward scaffolding on the ridge gave way. 2 men went with it. One was Rennick Fenn. Arvald Dunveld went in after him. The letter did not dramatize it. It said only, "I went in because he was a good man, and good men are not common on the frontier, and I did not want the world to lose one. I pulled him out by his collar from a 30-foot drop into the Ashfin Gorge." I do not know if he ever told anyone. He thanked me the next morning at breakfast and offered me the last of his dried plums, and we did not speak of it again. Oswald set the letter down on the table. He sat for a while. Outside, the rain had softened to a mist, and the light through the workshop window was the particular gray of late October, the kind of light that doesn't warm a room, only makes it dimmer. His father. 63 years old when he died. A widower for the last 12 of them, carving walking sticks and chair rungs in the back of a cold shop because his hands still needed something to do. He had never once, in all those years, mentioned a man named Arvald Dunveld. Oswald thought about the 12-year-old boy he had been, sitting at that table, watching his father say a name and then press his mouth shut over it like a lid being fitted to a box. He had not known, then, what the name held. He had not thought to ask. And then 30 years had gone by, and his father had died with the box still closed, and the name had faded with everything else. But he had come home from that road. He had come home, and he had sat at a supper table, and he had said a name once, quietly, like a word for a thing he didn't have better language for. I didn't know, Oswald said. I know, Sarah said. She was not looking at him. She was looking at the tools in the open box, the planes and the spokeshaves and the marking gauge. Her hands were in her lap, and she sat the way people sit when they have carried something very heavy for a very long way. He wanted to come himself, she said. For 30 years, he wanted to come. There was always a reason not to. The clan, the work, the distance. She looked up. When he died, I found the letter in the box. Under the top tray, where he kept it. Her voice was even, but her hands were tight in her lap. He wrote it 10 years ago. He'd been carrying it ever since. Oswald was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, he saved my father's life. Yes. And my father, he never came to find him either. Sarah said nothing. She did not need to. Oswald stood and went to the window. The mist had settled on the woodyard outside, on the stacked cedar and the elm rounds waiting for the saw. He had spent 45 years in this shop. He had learned the trade from his father, who had learned part of it, the part about patience, about straight grain, about not hurrying what was not ready to be hurried, from a man on the eastern road who happened to have tusks and green-brown skin and hands that could fall a pine in 20 minutes. He turned around. He taught my father to read the grain, Oswald said. I never knew where that came from. My father used to say, the wood will tell you, if you listen. I thought he'd made it up. Sarah's breath caught. Just slightly. My father said the same thing, she said. Word for word. There was a silence in the shop then, not an uncomfortable one. The kind that settles when two people have arrived at the same place by very different roads. There's something else, Sarah said. She reached into the box again, beneath the tools, and lifted out a small wrapped piece, cloth, tied with cord. She set it on the workbench and unwrapped it. Inside was a carved finial. Small, no bigger than a man's fist. A single piece of cedar, worked into the shape of an opening hand. The grain ran perfectly through the fingers, and whoever had made it understood the wood so well that the thing looked almost warm. He started it on the eastern road, Sarah said. The winter they built the ridge section. He told me he began it for Rennick, he meant to give it to him before the end of the build. But then the scaffolding went down, and after that, everything changed, and he took it home still unfinished. She paused. He kept it in the box his whole life. He said he never could bring himself to finish it for anyone but the men it was meant for. Oswald picked it up. It was lighter than it looked. The cut was extraordinary, the kind of work that came from 60 years of practice and a genuine love of the grain. He turned it over in his hands, the opening hand in cedar, and felt the weight of the thing, not in ounces, but in years. It's not finished, he said. No, Sarah agreed. He looked at her. She looked back. My father couldn't carve, Oswald said. He could build. He could frame and joint and fit, but carving, he set the finial down gently. He always said it needed a steadier hand than his. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then, I can. He looked at her. My father taught me, she said simply. 20 years at his bench. Oswald considered that. He looked at the finial. He looked at the open toolbox, the planes, the spokeshaves, the marking gauge worn to the shape of a particular pair of hands. Then finish it, he said. Here, if you'd like. The bench is free. She stayed 4 days. She had not intended to stay more than one. She had a road ahead of her, a clan's worth of work waiting in the eastern foothills, and she was not the kind of woman who imposed. But the bench was good and the light was right in the mornings, and Oswald made no ceremony of it. He simply made tea at dawn and went to work himself, and they worked side by side in the kind of quiet that craftspeople understand, the quiet of two people who respect the thing they are both trying to do. On the second morning, she asked him about the chair in the corner, the half-finished one, its back rail still rough. He told her the joinery was giving him trouble. She looked at it for a moment, then picked up her father's marking gauge and showed him what was wrong, in about 6 words. He stood there for a moment, then nodded slowly, the way men nod when something they already half knew has been put into language. They did not talk much beyond the work. But what they did say was easy. She finished the finial on the 3rd morning. She did not rush the last detail. She asked Oswald once for a finer gouge than the ones in the box, and he handed it over without comment. When it was done, she set it in his hands. The opening hand in cedar, complete. 30 years of a man's intention, finished by his daughter's hand, in the shop of the son of the men it had always been meant for. Oswald did not say much. He stood at the workbench for a long time, holding it, while the light came through the window and the first early frost crept across the woodyard outside. Then he set it on the shelf above the bench, the one where he kept the 3 things from his father that he had not been able to put away. He cleared his throat. "Stay for supper," he said. She did. And in the morning, when she packed her coat and shouldered her bag, she left the toolbox behind. "I can't take those," Oswald said. "He would want them used," Sarah said. "They've been in a box long enough." She looked at the shelf, at the small cedar hand above the bench. He'd want to know they were working. She left before the frost burned off. Oswald watched her go from the doorway, and then he went back inside. He stood at the bench for a while. He picked up one of the hand planes, the largest one, the wood of the handle worn to a perfect, particular smoothness. He ran his thumb across the cap iron. The edge was still sharp. He set it against the elm round he'd been avoiding for 3 weeks, and he pushed. The shaving came up clean and pale as ribbon. He worked until the light failed, and when he finally stopped, the shop smelled of elm and cedar and the tea he'd forgotten, and the shelf above the bench held 4 things now instead of 3. Outside, the frost lay across the woodyard in the dark, and somewhere on the eastern road, a woman with her father's tools and her father's patience was making her way home. Both of them, for the first time in a long time, felt something they had nearly stopped expecting. Not alone.